I have read and heard a lot that Star Wars Jedi Survivor is one of the best Star Wars games ever made, and while this does seem like a rather bold conclusion, there have been plenty of Star Wars games made over the past decades, some of them being excellent, some of them being forgettable. I do have to admit that I had an amazing time playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor. In fact, a much better time than playing its predecessor, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, as I explained in a previous video that you will find in the description down below. So, just how good is Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and why do so many players regard it in such high esteem? Well, that is what we are going to talk about in today's video. Hello and welcome to the channel, it's Iran, and today I will review the latest game in the Star Wars franchise, Jedi Survivor, a sequel to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which happened to be both a critical and a commercial success, which actually caused some surprise to Electronic Arts. I mean, remember, it came at a time when Electronic Arts were saying that they did not believe in single-player games, and they ended up releasing Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order without much enthusiasm, and surprise, it ended up being a very good game, beating all of their expectations. Well, it turns out that by the time I'm writing these lines, its sequel, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, is beating Jedi Fallen Order's sales under the same time period by 30%, so things are looking pretty good for single-player Star Wars games, it seems. So, today, I'm going to go through the strengths and weaknesses of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I will try to explain why I too believe it is a great game, and why I will probably give it yet another run after completing its main storyline in just 28 hours. So first, let's talk about what makes Jedi Survivor a great game. And since it is a Star Wars game, I think that we ought to talk about the story a little, which felt like a true Star Wars stories that respected the established lore while building on top of it, with some new elements cherry-picked from the Disney canon as well. And while I personally dislike the High Republic, especially the comics and the books, I do find its timeline interesting, and so bringing one of the main antagonists from this era was, in my eyes, a brilliant move. And I think that it did help make me want to know more a little bit about the plot and its backstory. I was truly involved in its development, and it really makes me more intrigued about what will happen in other games of the same era, like, for example, Star Wars Eclipse. Of course, it wouldn't be a good Star Wars game without a huge reveal, and in this case, the betrayal and the fall to the dark side of one of the characters. To be frank, I thought that there was something fishy about this character that I found a little bit bizarre at times. I thought that Lucasfilm Games here would play the card of identity politics with him, but no, thank God we didn't have yet another Star Wars-esque character, and it turned out that he had his own agenda and that he used our hero as a pawn. And as we get to understand his motivations throughout the end of the story, I really thought that it made a lot of sense and mirrored a lot of ways that we've seen a lot of characters before falling in the dark side in the Star Wars saga, and it was a really good touch here. But it wasn't just the story that made the game great. I think that some of the locations of the game, as well as some of the enemies that we would find here, were quite superior to the previous game. It was absolutely awesome to start on Coruscant and to get to discover some of the lower levels of the city. I mean, sure, the city's planet rendering have a heavy toll on performance, more on that later, but it looks truly phenomenal nevertheless. We also get to revisit Jeddah after being introduced to it in Rogue One, and here we get to have a chance to get a deeper understanding as of why this planet is important to those who resist the Empire and still believe in the Jedi and in the Force. And then there is Kobo, which is really huge, way bigger than anything I would have imagined when I first landed on it, featuring a very large variety of different biomes and area, ranging from volcanic canyons to tar pits to beautiful arid mesas and even mountains and rainforests. This diversity here really made me feel like I was traveling a lot on the same planet, when in reality I would just very easily be able to get back to my ship in just a few minutes, if I decided not to use the fast travel mode. Now, within these locations, we get to fight a large roster of different foes, ranging from Imperial troops, including Dark Trooper, which were similar to those that we've seen in the Bad Batch, and I personally love the ongoing revival of Dark Trooper, which we saw, of course, in the 1990s with Dark Force, and then Rebellion, and also Star Wars Galaxies. But Separatist forces also made a comeback, this time being controlled by a band of raiders at the service of the main antagonist, and fighting droid Decas was a pure joy in that Separatist ship. There was, of course, a lot of different beasts too, each specific to their own biomes, and I appreciated that we could choose to fight them via the secondary quest mechanics or not, which really is entirely skippable if you wish to focus on the main story, and it definitely contributes here to the replayability of the game if you wish to know what you are missing out on. Alright, now let's talk about the elephant in the room, performance, which was the main reason why this game was review bombed. And while it is true that the game occasionally sees some drops in performance, it usually runs smoothly on both of my PCs. I played it on my older laptop, which has an RTX 2070 and 32GB of RAM DDR4, and also on my most recent laptop here, which has an RTX 3070 and 32GB of RAM DDR5. And apart from Coruscant, I didn't really notice much of a change. Maybe that's because I focus a lot on Star Citizen and therefore I am used to performance drops, but that does not bother me too much. In fact, I appreciate the developers trying to push those boundaries of what they can make into a AAA game, which really needs to be accessible to as many people as possible to sell well enough to even break even. So while I understand that there's a certain audience here that's used to copycats of all the games with 60 frames plus per second, I understand that these people might have been complaining. For me, it actually was not an issue at all, and the fact that the developers here even patched the game later to further optimize performance really made me have a great experience in the game. I don't think that this is going to remain an issue. Last, I want to talk about the difficulty of the game, which in my opinion was made to be less difficult than the previous one. And although it can still be challenging at times, Cal starts the game with almost all of his powers from the previous game, so it already helps a lot when it comes to defeating some enemies, especially larger groups. Also, the puzzles were simpler too. It's something that I'm generally not very fond of. I prefer some action for my story progression. But here the puzzles were simple enough to be figured out by just observing the area carefully, and I like that. I also like that Cal had access to pretty much all of his powers he got from the last game, meaning that it was quite simple to get a hand on the different jumping or force mechanics. There was no need to relearn them, and really what the game did instead was to expand on those powers to make Cal even more powerful, and that was really smart. So, is Star Wars Jedi Survivor worth a try? Well, if you are a Star Wars fan, absolutely. The game builds on the existing lore while adding good new location. Characters that we could see again in future material. And if you don't care about Star Wars so much, well, actually, why not? It still is a great adventure game with a great story and good mechanics that will keep you entertained for many hours. That's why I will give Star Wars Jedi Survivor a solid 9 out of 10. I definitely think that it is one of the greatest games of this year so far, but let me know in the comment section down below. Have you tried Star Wars Jedi Survivor? What did you think of it? And also, would be interested in knowing how it performs on your PC. Do you still have some of the performance issues? Perhaps, or is it working well on your end? Let me know in the comment section down below. With that comes the end of this video, but thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all the people out there who helped this channel and made this video possible, including Deployable Infidel, Zero Crusher, and Dr. Falbin. I've been Rad. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later.